final segment on this particular show, and it's a very juicy one. USC Unranked in the preseason USA Today coaches poll, of course, at Trojans Wire. We are a USA Today Gannett publication outlet, so we run those USA Today, US LBM coaches polls. That's part of we're contractually obligated at Trojans Wire to run those stories. So like we certainly did a lot of stories on that just because it's USA Today, right? Why wouldn't we? So USC Unranked, and I think, Ethan, the really big eye grabber in terms of teams in the poll, Illinois at 12. So September 27 in Champaign, USC versus Illinois, a game that a lot of people think that's the hinge point game for USC this season. Illinois number 12, USC unranked. Now, if USC is unbeaten, Trojans are probably in the top 25 by then, although with Missouri State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, Michigan State, it's not as though USC is going to be, top 10. Like Illinois is going to be ranked higher, assuming it doesn't stumble. And I referenced earlier, for Jacoby Lane being left off the Biletnikoff preseason watch list, free motivation for him. Like it doesn't cost him anything. This is a stupid little watch list. Like it doesn't cost him money. It doesn't cost him touchdowns. Like it's just free motivation. And so I'm looking at this preseason coaches poll as the same thing. It's free motivation. Like USC didn't do anything to earn this or not earn it. Illinois hasn't done anything to earn or not earn it. I mean, of course, Illinois, because it beat South Carolina in the bowl game, that's why it's at number 12. But the 2025 Illinois team has not done anything yet. And that gets into my old-time rant. I think preseason polls should be abolished. This is guesswork. It's based on last season. It's a dart throw. Fire this into the sun. We shouldn't have polls until, in my mind, November, like after Election Day. Other people will say, well, at least not until October, which I could tolerate. But like early season rankings, we don't have a clue. This is all guesswork. But hey, it's free motivation for USC. Like Illinois is ranked number 12. We're unranked. So the coaches think that Illinois is a lot better than USC. Yes, give me some of that, Ethan Inman.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of hammer your point home about how much, these preseason polls are guesswork, it made me kind of think back to the 2021 season when USC somehow went into the season ranked number 15 in the country. And then we all know how that went, obviously, with Keaton Slovis and the gang. So not that anyone wants to remember that. But yeah, these preseason polls obviously don't, foretell anything about the season. If USC was foretold to be number 15 in the country, that season goes a whole lot differently, and the USC program looks a whole lot different right now. So so we can't know if Illinois is a national title contender or if they're 2021 USC. Like we can't know. I do want to just guess, and because it is a guesswork thing, I want to kind of guess what is inspiring the coaches to rank Illinois so high. And my best guess is, and this is an article about the top, quarterbacks in the Big Ten, is that people are just higher on Luke Altmire than they are on Jade Mava. And, Luke Altmire is a guy who has been around bigger programs for longer. He, was a guy who, stole some snaps from Jackson Dart, who ended up being a first-round draft pick, obviously another former USC guy. When both of them were at Ole Miss, there was kind of a quarterback, competition for most of Jackson Dart's career there. It felt like Luke Altmire never really went away. Jackson Dart was clearly the number one guy most of the time, but Luke Altmire played well enough that he was kind of always there. He was always kind of, in Jackson Dart's rearview mirror, so to say, in terms of, being a guy that, hey, if you screw up, like I can step in and lead this offense, at almost the level that you can lead it at. So I just think that Luke Altmire is a guy who inspires more confidence in people than Jade Mava, which, again, it's a preseason poll. So people are just guessing, and this doesn't say anything about whether or not Jade Mava can lead USC and will be better than Luke Altmire. It's just guesswork. I do think, like you said, great point about free bulletin board material. For my first reaction to this was, oh, interesting. Like, this kind of changes our conversation that we've been having about what at this point in the season are USC's 3 underdog games, because we reference Michigan, we reference Notre Dame, we reference Oregon. In the poll, I believe Michigan was ranked lower than Illinois was. So it's almost like, oh, maybe we should vault Illinois into that conversation and maybe take Michigan out of it, or maybe it's a 4-headed monster. I don't know, but it's just kind of interesting to see that first and foremost, especially with a guy like Bryce Underwood. Again, I think it's just confidence in the quarterback. The number 1 Big Ten team in the poll is Ohio State, which, great program. Number 2 Big Ten team is Penn State, which is just people being, again, confident in the quarterback. If you scroll down on this list, the only person they have ranked higher than Luke Altmire is Drew Aller, a guy who, people are just the most confident in as an NFL prospect, which I think is slightly more unwarranted than people would like to think. But that's a, kind of a different story for a different time. I think. But back to the free bulletin board material, it's kind of the reason why I don't think that you should get rid of these preseason polls, is that USC can now use this as motivation. And it's not kind of like 2021, like unneeded pressure that's going to, look bad on USC if they were to have, a crumbling season, which I don't think they're going to, for the record. But if they did, like, there's not this unneeded pressure going into the season that, oh, wow, the expectations are so high. Now, if we lose a game, the national media is going to be talking about how we're frauds and all that stuff. They don't have that kind of unneeded pressure. They can come in and kind of be underdogs. And that's kind of what I say about this whole situation, is like, let them underrate us. I feel like this also goes back to the Jacoby Lane conversation. It just kind of goes to this general national media perception that USC is always overrated and overhyped going into the season, which I feel like people from other schools and other fan bases always kind of seem to say, and they always point to, oh, look at cases like 2021, even look at cases like last season, when USC was ranked in the top 25 going into the season, rose in the polls dramatically after the first couple of games, especially that LSU win, and then, fell out entirely by the end of the season. They'll always point to those and be like, the national media always favors USC. They can't say that this season. They can't say that about the coaches. We'll obviously see what the AP poll ends up being, but I don't think it's entirely impossible that USC's out of that as well. So I just think it puts USC in a lot better position, actually, than they've been in some of these more recent seasons where there's pressure on them. And instead it's like, hey, let them be the underdogs. Let them be the guys that everyone's underestimating. And then, use that as fuel, like you said, to go out and prove everybody wrong.
I want to be very clear in terms of my point of emphasis here about preseason polls being awful and needing to be thrown into the sun. I'm not saying that USC is better than Illinois. I'm saying we should wait to play games before we pronounce which team is better. That's my point, all right? So just to be really clear, I have no idea whether USC is better than Illinois, but it is pretty darn striking when Illinois is 12 and USC is outside the top 25. Like, wait a minute. What do we know this? What evidence? Like, what evidence from 2025 do we have that Illinois is going to be 14, 17, 20 spots better than USC? We don't know empirically. We haven't seen a thing. We haven't seen a game. We haven't seen a live play. It's just so utterly dumb to just make this dart throw and, not all the time, but certainly some of the time where you are in a preseason poll influences the national championship race. It influences how the cards line up when we get to, in past decades, the BCS championship game, today, the 12-team college football playoff. That if a team has that top tier position and it loses only once, another team that started the season 10 spots lower, has the same record, is probably not going to finish higher. So it just bakes in a barrier that was undeserved by the higher team, and it was not deserved by the lower team either. It's just fundamentally unfair. Now, separate point about preseason polls and how idiotic and pointless they are in point of fact in terms of actually measuring the quality of teams and how good they are. we're in a new era, not just the 12-team playoff, but the 18-member Big Ten, the 16-member SEC, the 17-member ACC. With conferences this large, you can call them super conferences or mega conferences if you'd like, but you get the point. Supersized conferences. You're not going to be able to play most of the teams in the conference. You're playing about half the teams in your league, more or less, close to it. And so schedule balance, schedule rotations, how favorable the schedule is or isn't, is a huge determinant of the path. And Indiana was great last year. I did think that Kurt Cignetti deserved to be National Coach of the Year more than Kenny Dillingham of Arizona State. And I live in Phoenix, so I got a lot of heat on that one. I thought Cignetti deserved it. But we can say, even those of us who thought Cignetti deserved to be Coach of the Year last year, Indiana had a pretty good schedule path. Didn't have to play Penn State, didn't have too many pothole, landmine type games. The schedule did unfold pretty favorably. Indiana was awesome, and Indiana deserved to be in the playoff, but nevertheless had the right path. I mean, the Hoosiers took advantage of it, but still had the right path. When we consider Illinois, just very briefly, Illinois caught Michigan at the right time. Can we all agree on that? We have John Diadamo, host of the Michigan Show here at the Voice of College Football, chiming in. He's going to be a fill-in host for Mark Rogers on that nighttime national show later this season. But John would certainly say Illinois caught Michigan in a little dip after Michigan's 2023 national championship season. That's part of why Illinois was able to get where it went. And again, you give Illinois credit for taking advantage of Michigan not being very good, something that USC couldn't do. So Illinois was better than USC last year, but do you apply that this year? And as Ethan said, Illinois ranked 3 spots ahead of Michigan. Are we assuming that Michigan's not going to significantly improve? Because Michigan could not have had a worse passing game than it did last season. There's nowhere to go but up for the Wolverines. Do we want to just keep Illinois ahead of Michigan because of what happened last year? I just can't escape that. These preseason rankings are based on what happened the year before. And, when Mark Rogers does his top 25 each week of the actual season here at the Voice of College Football, Mark has the specific phrase, the top 25 that makes sense. And Mark's point of emphasis, and I'm right there with him on this, is, you just go by this year and what's happened in this week or this collection of weeks. You're not projecting who's going to be the best team. You're not projecting who's going to have the best record. It's what's happened after week 2. And if that means Kansas is number 1, Rutgers is number 2, and Wake Forest is number 3, that's how you should be ranking the teams. And that is completely opposite the philosophy of the preseason polls. So Ethan, anything to add in terms of Big Ten schedule strength, teams year to year ebbs and flows, and the other things that do go into the preseason polls but shouldn't?
I think preseason polls, I think we are in a place where preseason polls actually matter less than they used to, and I think that's kind of good for this whole issue of preseason polls affect who makes the playoff. They still do, but it's so much less important than it used to be with a 4-team playoff, or with the BCS where it was only 2 teams making the championship game. You got 12 teams making it now. It's probably going to go to 16 within the next couple of years. It's pretty hard to, unless you have a great strength of schedule versus having a difficult strength of schedule, it's pretty hard to be a top 12, 16 talented team and miss the playoff. Could you have been a top 4 team and just have had some bumps in the road, and that caused you to be ranked outside because of arbitrary factors that aren't actually related to your team talent and accomplishment? Absolutely. That's a lot more easy to do, is leave a top 4 team outside of the top 4 of the playoff. One of the last couple of years of the 14 playoff, we saw this, happen kind of to an extreme degree where, you had the argument about whether, 14-0 Florida State should be let in, and then they didn't get let in, and then you actually you had Georgia ended up blowing them out in the championship game, and then you have number 2 TCU getting blown out by Georgia in the championship game, where it's just like there's these teams that are in the top 5 that are so clearly like way worse than the competition, and it's just like it's just based on them going and having undefeated regular seasons and kind of lesser conferences and easier schedules and blah blah, blah whatever. But anyways. But those teams still, you feel, deserve a shot. You can't write them off on paper just because they're in a quote unquote weaker conference, because that just feeds SEC superiority and nobody likes that. But anyways, you want to give these teams a shot. So I feel like in the current era of the college football playoff, teams that kind of have earned a shot are much more likely to get a shot. You can lose 2 games, maybe even 3 games, and still compete for a college football playoff berth. So I think in that sense, the polls matter a little bit less than they used to. And, teams that are outside of the polls should feel a little less slighted, because if you're in the top 2 or 3 of a major conference, you're going to compete for a college football playoff spot. And, you're not going to get, you're not going to go undefeated and be the champion of your conference and still get left out. That just doesn't happen anymore. I think, the more that I think about it, I think quarterback play factors in a lot more than people would like to admit. I mean, these coaches and, the coaches a little bit more, but especially the writers, they, only have time to watch so many different programs and so many different games. Like, I don't pretend to be an expert on Illinois football. I'm trying to be an expert as much as I can on USC football. But I just imagine that a lot of the narratives that a lot of other people that are not Illinois football experts, are kind of driving about Illinois football has to do with Luke Altmire, and that's why I brought him up, is because, a lot of the narratives, obviously, about even NFL teams a lot of times starting in with the quarterback for, teams, for coaches and teams that are not, as experts about them as they should be. Now, Big Ten teams, like Big Ten coaches that are going to play Illinois, they obviously should know Illinois inside and out, and should know their flaws and all that kind of stuff. But you can't really always expect every like Big 12 team or Pac-12 team or Mountain West team to know the ins and outs of Illinois. So I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting to see if the same Big Ten teams that are in the poll are, end up in the poll at the end of the season. I don't think it's going to happen. It's never what happens. But, I don't think that football fans need to be so super mega concerned about the polls as much as they used to anymore, just because there's a lot more opportunity to make the playoff despite making mistakes, despite, dealing with a tougher schedule. Not always the case, and there's going to be clear examples of teams that miss and teams that make it over, teams that just were in a more fortunate situation, like in Indiana. But and that obviously fuels a lot of this national debate about playing cupcake games or actually playing tough out of conference games and stuff like that. I do think, though, the current landscape does allow opportunity for you to screw up a little bit more and for the poll not to matter as much and for you to use it, as USC probably will, as bulletin board.